I'm Dave Greenwood, and this is Overcoming Distractions. If you are an adult with ADHD, a busy professional, an entrepreneur, a high achiever, or just need some strategies to navigate your adult ADHD, you're in the right place. Who am I? I'm an entrepreneur with ADHD and the author of 2 books, Overcoming Distractions and Overcoming Burnout. I coach and mentor people just like you, and together we navigate the ups and downs of adult ADHD. From getting out of our own way to helping people just like you thrive in the workplace. That's what I do. Want more info on working with me? Hit overcomingdistractions.com. Ready? Let's get to today's podcast. All right, gang, welcome back to Overcoming Distractions. Once again, I am very happy that you have joined us. And if you read my first book, Overcoming Distractions, how ironic is that the same name, right? You know that we talked with a fair amount of entrepreneurs that had ADD, ADHD, and I wanted to not only tell their stories, because I thought a lot of books out there focused on children and students and what have you, but those of us with ADHD can do remarkable things as entrepreneurs, people who are self-employed, starting and running businesses. And when somebody with ADD can do that successfully, I want to know how they did it. So that's what we are going to focus on today. One of the many entrepreneurs that do listen to the podcast, he has reached out to me, and we want to tell his story. So today I want to introduce you to Russell Kramer. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thank you, David. Thank you for taking the time to have a conversation with me.
Yeah, and thanks for reaching out. Now, I shall also say that Russell is also a fellow author of, it's called Hocus Pocus Coming of Age with ADD and Its
That's
Medicines.
focus.
Why did I say Hocus Pocus?
It's okay. I
Oh
know.
my
I know.
God. That's because I got a kid who loves movies that.
Mhm.
So it's Hocus Focus Coming of Age with ADD and Its Medicines. I told Russell before we hit the record button that I rarely hit the edit button. I want people to get the real life ADD version of podcasting. So that's what it is. So let me just say that again. It's Hocus Focus Coming of Age with ADD and Its Medicines. Um, Tell me, well, first of all, you are self-employed, you're an entrepreneur.
Yes.
Give me a little bit of understanding of what you do as you're a contractor or a carpenter, correct?
Yes. I do woodworking. I've done a lot of custom woodwork, furniture making, milling lumber, and at the same time, a licensed contractor doing renovations, tile, drywall,
Hmm,
home improvement projects. Yeah.
cool. All right. We're gonna get back into that in a minute, but um, let's talk about the book briefly. Would you say this is a memoir
I
of
would I would 100% say it's a memoir. Yeah. When I
and
when I started it, I did want to do a research memoir, and I
hmm,
talked to a lot of people in the book world, and I had these chapters that were shifting back and forth, sort of between research, knowledge, and then like my story, and they're like, "This is jarring.
hmm,
You're going between two things, and just tell your story, just tell your story."
yeah, yeah.
But I'm working on another book now already, which is sort of a guidebook for specifically on medicated ADHD.
Yeah, cool. All right, cool. Well, we're gonna have you back when that one is out. So, um, why did you write the book? Um was there a time where you sat there and you know what? I gotta sit down and write about this.
Yeah. The It initially started when I was like 23 or 24. I could no longer access my medication for ADD, and like my insurance kind of thing fell out. It was a logistical situation. and I was really having a hard time in the withdrawals of Adderall. So I just started researching my own condition. I started writing my story to kind of put the pieces together as to how I ended up being in this position where I was incapable of doing anything and I seemed completely reliant on a synthetic substance for my focus and for my ability to function. So I just started looking back and I started telling and I started writing. And I wrote this book probably 6 times, 6 drafts to get it through. And I would say the first five were for me.
Hmm.
And this the last one is for everybody else if it can help them
Hmm.
and anyone else in that specific situation. But it was, yeah, it's an examination of that phenomenon through my own experience.
Did you uh did you find it difficult to write a book? It's interesting. I've had, because I've written two books, and I've had people say or ask, how does somebody with ADD write a book? So
Yeah,
how long did it take? What was your process?
it took 10 years.
Hmm.
And it is ironic that, like when I took Adderall, for example, I would write ferociously. Writing, it just felt good. And there were many times during the writing process where I was thinking, gee, if I just could have it, then it'd be different. And parts of it are written on medication because I have journals and I include that. But essentially, the process of learning how to write, I think, was part of me growing into my ADD as a person and figuring out how to use the brain I got to focus. I mean, writing the book helps me be a better father, husband, contractor. I learned process and sitting down when it was uncomfortable and just getting through things. It was a big, there was a big part of the healing, not just like emotionally, but also to actually manage my ADD. The process was just sitting down and writing.
Yeah. So a lot of people who listen to this podcast are busy professionals. Um, some of them are executives, they're entrepreneurs running companies. Um, Many are involved in large projects, whether it's for their company, for clients, what have you. So, if there was a piece of advice that you could give somebody, given that you tackled the process of writing a book, which is a very large project, um, what is that kind of one piece of advice you would give that kind of busy professional that is working on large, extensive projects?
Were there large projects or like for a book?
I would say large projects because I would think that some of the habits a busy person with ADD would need to implement could be similar.
I think putting it into manageable bites
Yeah,
is really key, because if you think I'm just working on the book, it's gargantuan and you're like, where do I even begin?
yeah,
You take a time and sort of make a plan, which is what I'm resistant to. I think my ADD is like, no, I just go. I just go. That's my tendency is just start and then see what happens. But if you really take that little bit of time and make a list of the parts of this thing and then make a sub list for those parts and then say, well, that only takes 15 minutes.
yeah.
And then make those lists and those divisions and do it in small, manageable parts. And I use the Pomodoro method when it comes
Hmm.
to what I call desk work, because normally I'm out like in the field doing work. But I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that it involves 25 minutes of just work. And during that 25 minutes, there's nothing else I permit myself to do other than the task at hand.
Yeah, that's actually how I wrote my first book was the Pomodoro.
Yeah,
Um,
I have the hourglasses.
yeah, I mean I used the phone app, and I've talked to people where it almost it got to a point where it was a little challenge at first, but once I got into it, it kind of turned it into a game for me because and I've talked about this before, where when I wrote the book, there was a little bit of a miscommunication with the publisher. And I had to write the book in 7 weeks.
Mm.
Um, Actually, I had to write it much quicker, but I negotiated a little bit. But and I was running a full-fledged public relations firm at the time. So uh, I really needed to focus. And that's how I did it. But the Pomodoro technique, and you can get online and people will laugh at it and what have you. But if you give it some time to work, it does work. And I turned it into a game where it's like, how many Pomodoros can I rack up in a day?
Yeah,
And it
it
did work
helps.
for me.
Yeah, I learned it from a planner. I had like a productivity planner that was just it was a Pomodoro notebook.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes there's a joke kind of on ADD and ADHD community online, like, oh, you can't just get a planner, but it's like sometimes a good planner really makes a huge difference.
No, I know. Yeah.
And I actually designed my own. Had fun with it and take it seriously.
Yeah, and I want to get into some of the things that you do as a uh as an entrepreneur, somebody who's working for themselves. But you you had mentioned to me that one of the reasons you got to where you are today um is a combination of the medication, um, no medication, and then finding maybe a career or a skill or a craft that worked with your
Yeah.
brain. So can you kind of walk us through your and I want to preface this, and I think people have heard me before, is that I'm not anti-medication. I took medication as a kid and a young adult. I have chosen not to take medication as an adult. I've, worked other strategies. Other days I wish I had medication, absolutely. but but I try and tough it out. But your experience with um ADD meds is kind of how you got to this point. So can you kind of explain that?
Yeah, and I definitely want to preface this by saying that I'm no medical professional. I'm not a doctor. If I advise one way or the other, it's anecdotal completely.
Yeah.
And I know that that's a personal choice that people have to make and with their doctors and things like that. And while I do discuss the medication, I'm not advocating for or against, but I am advocating for a deeper conversation.
Yeah. No, I think that's legitimate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I did take them. I started taking them when I was 7, and they were amphetamine based, and I took amphetamine medication until I was about 23 years old, on and off for various periods of my life. But I developed, sorry, my kids at home. I developed some video editing skills on Adderall, and I was highly proficient video editor, and I was doing film production, and I was making decent money, and I was having a good time. But then, due to circumstance, I lost access to my medication, and I was promptly fired, which was
Hmm.
really funny because I was giving this client a video about every 2 weeks, and they were really satisfied. And I lost the medication. I worked really hard on the video, and I said, well, it is what it is. And I sent it off, and within 15 minutes, got an email that we were no longer working together, and they said that the product lacked the previous, in quotes, oomph.
Hmm.
And I know that that oomph was that extra edge that I had gotten from the medication, which at that point, the relationship I had with it had gotten a little toxic. But to make a longer story short, over time and through various avenues, I had to ask, I kept asking myself, what would I be doing if I didn't take medication? Because I can't know, because there's no control group in my life. There's only one life, and that life was interrupted with long use of medications that weren't completely sustainable for me. And then an answer came to me. It was like, you'd be working with your hands, you'd be doing that. And at the time, I was a teacher, but I dropped that and I started calling contractors saying, give me a job. I want to be a carpenter. And I started working with those people. And I worked and I worked, and I had an apprenticeship with a master furniture builder
Hmm.
for some time. And then when the time felt right, I got a license and I started doing contract work on my own.
How did you, was it immediate that you found that connection between like the brain and doing something with your hands? Was it like an aha moment that like, wow, holy crap.
Yeah, I think so. And I had always been doing crafts, like I did art, I did bookbinding, and I did things. But once I was like building things in the tangible space, I was like, this is really satisfying. And I was able to do it without medications for 12 hours plus a day.
Hmm.
It really just became, I had a focus unlike before. And I thought to myself, perhaps that the ADD sometimes is not necessarily changing who you are to fit into sort of the expectations of society at large or anything like that, but figuring out where you fit. Because I don't think if you asked me as a child that I ever said I want to be a carpenter. It never, but being able to kind of listen to who I actually am or how my brain and body works, it's a good fit. And it took some time for me to figure that out.
No, and uh I don't think you're alone in that. I think those of us with ADD do have to go through that process. Some of us go through many careers
Yeah.
before we find that connection. I remember speaking with uh, Dr. Ned Hallowell for overcoming distractions, and he said something just so basic to me, but it makes a lot of sense. He says one of the best ways to thrive with ADHD is to marry the right person and find the right job. Um, and those are, I believe, two must-haves
Yeah. And
as an adult with ADHD.
without ADHD too.
No, yeah, exactly. We're not so different in that in that part of life, you know. So, um, did you, and I think you talk about some of these things in the book, you know, I I know growing up that, and I think we see this more in boys than girls, but I know growing up that there are many instances where my life was a train wreck, you know. I was a terror. So do you have a situation that people can relate to growing up that maybe a funny story that something happened that you're like, oh my God, this
Yeah.
this is this is ADD rearing its ugly head.
I mean, some of them aren't so funny, but I guess they're funny now. I mean, I have a whole, map of catastrophe that's led me from birth till now and different.
Right, I think a lot of us do, yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad that they're funny now. I mean, because I was kind of fluctuating on and off medication, but I think what you mean is like that sort of raw young energy. And I mean, I was a really avid skateboarder and I was always trespassing and vandalizing with my skateboard. I wasn't doing other things. Like in high school, I had a speeding issue with cars,
Mhm.
and I was on Adderall at the time, but I was able to drive very fast and with in my mind like surgical acuity on the road. And I had been, my friends were making a joke because I got pulled over 10 times before I got a ticket, and I would always just say. I always just figured that was the end of the road, and the cop would come up, and he'd say, "Well, you're going like 80 and a 45. What's your problem?" And I said, "I was just bored." I wouldn't try to fight it. I'd say, just, it's over. You got me. And they kept letting me go until they didn't. And I had to take a course and everything like that. And I was arrested for possession of marijuana. And I think taking the medication also made me particularly feel unafraid of experimenting with drugs. I took a lot of different drugs, psychedelics. And, I once took LSD and just rode my bicycle out into the distance and got hit by a car. I flew off the windshield. And, it's almost like to connect that to ADD, I would just follow these impulses.
Yeah,
If I was sitting there and I was tripping or something like that, I'd say, I think I'm going to just ride for a while.
yeah,
And it's sort of this uninhibited, uncollected energy, which was beautiful and interesting, but also it completely indecisive.
yeah.
And yeah, so I got into all kinds of fun trouble like that.
What do you think an adult with ADHD can take away from your book, um, in terms of maybe just learning more about themselves?
Well, I think that the book has a lot of really critical self-awareness in it
Hmm.
and things I've recognized in myself. And I hope that people can use it to ask those kinds of questions for themselves. And I mean, it is a lot about the medication, but it also is, coming of age. So I talk a lot about just growing up on its own and how to know yourself and know your relationship with medication and how to like kind of navigate in a world where at least I didn't know exactly where I fit and figure that out better.
I think that that is critically important is the self-awareness. And I think many of us maybe don't have that at 17 years old. We might not even have it at 22. I think
Yeah,
it in the world of ADD, it 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 comes with time.
yeah, and it did, and I had a lot of hard lessons. And I mean, in the book, I don't think it's all attributed to it, but I did have like opportunities to sit in sacred plant ceremony stuff with like ayahuasca and stuff like that, and that really helped me understand myself a little bit better.
Hmm.
Talk about that as well, which is sort of like the reversal between pharmaceutical psychotropics and natural psychedelics.
And that's a perfect example of one of my favorite topics is whatever works.
Yeah,
To whatever you find helps you get through life and even thrive with a different brain is is what you need to follow. I mean, there's a lot of very simplistic advice out there, and I cross between keeping it simple but finding something that works. It's something as simple as, you know, finding a to-do list for your business. I don't care what works as long as it works,
yeah,
and that
and
you cite a perfect example of this is a part of my life that I gained a lot of awareness.
yeah, yeah, and I think it's what it works is a good approach, but you also, I think it's important to be safe and know what's sustainable,
Hmm.
because that's at least my relationship with the medication, for example, is it worked completely. And a lot of people, I kind of talk online and stuff like that, and they're saying, well, it didn't work for you if you're talking about alternatives. And I say, well, no, it did. It
Hmm.
worked magically.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is, I'm just concerned about the sustainability. Like how long is it going to work
Yeah.
until it becomes a problem? And also there's, studies that come out that say that the dopamine receptors get worn out and we might be predispositioned towards Parkinson's or things like that.
Hmm. Yeah.
And there needs to be more research in those departments because while it works, we have to make sure it's safe
Yeah.
because it's pretty significant taking a daily amphetamine.
No, and I think any medication, whether you're going to take blood pressure medication or an antibiotic or like you say,
Yeah,
medication for ADD, it's all a personal choice. It's a discussion you need to have with yourself, with a medical professional that understands these things.
for sure.
Um, and even your family. Um, I know a lot of people have discussions with their husband or wife that they need to figure out if this is going to make life better. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't have a family at the time. And sometimes I think I wouldn't have been able to because of, for me, the particular personality change. It was hard for me to be, I didn't date anybody when I was taking the
yeah,
medications.
yeah.
Yeah.
And again, folks, we obviously just want to reinforce that these are personal choices. Some of you out there do take medication. It works. That's great. Um, but
Yeah, I get
you
it
know,
a lot online that I've been accused of med shaming, and
mm,
it really is not my intention at all.
yeah,
That really, I know that I speak to a niche kind of the ADD community, but the people who are on the fence or struggling with that relationship, I want to be there for that. But anyone who's on medications, I'm not trying to like shepherd them away or tell them what they're doing is wrong at all.
yeah, no, and I think that again, that's a valid point. So I just like to reinforce that because I want people again, I want to make it clear that um, for many it is a must-have with their current situation. So
Yeah, it can be life-saving for sure.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
So that coupled with the tools and the strategies of daily life, which you don't get from medication. Some people find that combination um, very helpful to manage life and work and career and everything else.
Oh
So,
yeah.
yeah. So let's talk about your business because, as I said, I think a lot of people can learn a lot from uh, those of us with ADD, ADHD, um, running businesses, entrepreneurs, people who are self-employed. It's not always, we're not sitting there with beautiful women in bikinis on yachts every day. I
No.
mean, it's a challenge. It's stressful running your own show.
Oh yeah.
So tell tell us how um tell us how you kind of operate your business, what has worked, what systems you have put in place as a an entrepreneur with ADD.
Well, like bookkeeping software, I mean, on a like a ground level, using that kind of stuff is really helpful. I have an online bookkeeping software where I can say where every expense went and where it came from and keep track of all my expenses because, like I said earlier, it's really kind of my natural impulse is just go. And when I first went into business, I made this mistake of just going. People would
Yeah,
say, "How much does it cost?" I think it'll be this. I did the job and it was done, and I didn't look at my numbers at all. I was just, this is a huge mistake.
yeah,
So I wasn't looking in the financial mirror as time was going on, and I was just working and working and working, and I was satisfied with my tangible work. I was producing good builds, but I wasn't keeping track of my numbers at all.
yeah,
And then it was a problem. So I started being diligent about showing up to my accounts every day and looking at my bookkeeping and keeping a close track of how long things took me. Something I did for a period and I do on and off, which is, I think someone has told me it is kind of a technique, but I just discovered it on my own without hearing about it, is like every day I'll keep a log of what I've done
mm,
at what time. So to be like 8:35 arrived at the job site, 8:45 got my tools ready, 9:30 completed this task. And then I might say 9:45, I looked at my phone for 15 minutes.
mm,
So being very almost overly meticulous to keep track of my time, just to have that reflection. So I think, because with ADD, there's that time blindness, and I definitely suffer from that,
yeah,
where I could be working on something it felt like 20 minutes, but it was all day, or things like that. And that is becomes a crutch, at least in the trades, because a big part of my job is estimating.
yeah,
And with estimating, I have to estimate how many hours a task may take me.
mm,
And I have a difficult time sometimes understanding I'm always low. It always takes longer. So kind of by tracking my time in this way and taking the time to also look back at it, it's a really helpful tool for me to understand what I'm doing with my time because once I'm on the scent, I don't it's hard it's easy for me to lose track of
yeah,
everything. I guess it's that hyper focus. When I'm doing the project, it's everything. And it's hard to turn off too. I mean, as a business owner that the hours are 24/7, 365.
yeah. Oh,
It's
yeah.
always so having something to turn off is important if I want to be there for my family as well.
How do you keep track of projects? Because I think whether you're working on something in an office setting or a proposal for a client or what have you, um, and what you do, where you're building things for clients, how do you actually keep track of the physical project?
For the physical project, what I done, it's the more lists and things I make, the easier things are. So a lot of times I'll make a big project list with the
Mm,
big bullets of what need to get done, and then I'll make sub lists for each of those items. And on those sub lists contain things that need to be bought, people that need to get called, and I'll break the task down into little bits. So what that does is when I get to the job site, there's less for me to think about because it's all right there. So it
yeah,
allows me to just relax my brain and only focus on the project because it's very easy to get overwhelmed when all this is going on, a huge project. There's subcontractors coordinate, the clients have their needs that need to be met. There's all this stuff going on. But if all I see is a task on a list, then I can focus on one thing at a time. And I think like the ADD brain is all over the place and ready to go. It's, I like to call it sometimes a global attention span. I can pay
Yeah.
attention to everything,
Oh yeah.
and that has useful sometimes, but sometimes it needs to be one thing. So giving myself the boundaries within my day of just making lists. It's really simple, but
And are you a paper guy or do you make digital lists?
I am a paper guy. I
No, I love a pad of paper. I'm telling you.
yeah, one
Sometimes
of
it just has to get street smart, you know?
well, I'm like constantly interfacing with a journal all day. Like that's how I like, if someone calls me, that's where I just like that's my brain external hard drive is
Yeah.
just a journal. But when I make these lists, I do make them digitally and I print them out though. I have a hard time. I mean, honestly, at the moment too, part of like my ADD is I use a dumb phone, which is unheard of. But I have a smartphone and it sits on my desk. But when I'm out and about and working, I can't. It's so good for my productivity that I don't have it.
That's
That
interesting.
there's no break in my attention. It's hard. It's like another quitting another addiction.
You can't go get on Facebook or something and waste an hour.
Yeah, and what's great is that I look at those apps on my laptop. I have Instagram and stuff on my laptop, and it reminds me of when I was a kid, and I'm probably the last generation to remember this,
Mm.
coming home and checking the answering machine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's I go the whole day without social media, and then I come home and I'm like, oh, now I'll take a look.
Yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
yeah,
No,
and
I
sometimes
miss those days actually.
yeah, it takes it's a lot of work and to not be distracted now. And I feel like as technology grows, the distractions just grow.
I often use the analogy when working one-on-one with people where they're into a project and then they're stuck. And I always use the analogy of the punch list where, in the trades there's a punch list. You're building an addition for a client and there's, 10 things that need to be done to complete the project. And I always use that analogy. And some people find that very helpful because now they have a little bit of and like you said, it could be on a pad of paper, it could be in their, whatever uh to-do list electronically, but it gives them a path to completion. So
Yeah, and that's like what we were talking about at the beginning. It's reducing to smaller and smaller
yeah,
bites because that's
yeah.
what it can be like. One of the the tasks, for example, can be trim. Just you got to do your trim, right?
Mm,
And then and that's on a list of painting, cleanup, this and that. But then you go into trim and there's measuring for trim, buying the trim, cutting, and then you make your cut list. So everything kind of gets, into tinier compartments.
yeah. As we wrap up, um what do you want uh what do you want people to know about your kind of ADD journey, and what can they take away from that to maybe I like to say after these podcasts, I like people to listen to the podcast and then go think about how they might be able to implement something in their life. So what do you want people to take away from our discussion?
I think that from my experience and my participation in this huge ADHD dialogue, what I want people to do, obviously, I do talk about the medication, but more specifically, I think even outside of the medication, to look at where you find resistances in the world that you attribute to you having ADD and the world not vibing with that, and look for ways that you can change as well and how you can change your habits and your approach to life and maybe get a different job or find where you find where you fit rather than trying to fit in is essentially what I think
Yeah.
I would want to inspire for people. And of course, think about, oh my God, I'm sorry, distractions. um think about what that is for you and how you can grow into your ADD, because I know you don't grow out of it, but that doesn't mean you can't still grow with it
Yeah.
and figure out what the benefits of this alternatively functioning brain are, and that it's not necessarily a disorder, but it's a different arrangement of capability.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great way of putting it. So grow into your ADD. So, um, where can people find the book? I know I'm going to put a link there, but
It's everywhere books are sold online. And I have a website, rlkramer.us, and
oh,
that's Kramer.
okay, cool. All right. We will have that link in the podcast notes. So, um, thank you for connecting with us and sharing your story and your advice, because I always love to chat with people who have kind of navigated the ups and downs and found where they can thrive. So thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I really appreciate you being willing to have me on and
Absolutely.
chatting with me
And
on
and
this.
we'll have you back when the next book is done.
Yes, it's gonna be a sailor's guide to unmedicated ADHD.
There we go. And hopefully it's not 10 years or so.
I'm hoping. Thank you.
All right, Russell, we'll see you soon.